avec une identité propre au quartier, donc spécifiquement pour Pointe-Saint-Charles, et en réponse aux besoins locaux, et qui met en place également des solutions locales qui sont réfléchies par les gens de la population. Parce que les gens qui habitent le quartier sont les premiers qui vont vivre les impacts de ces transformations. Et donc, pour nous, c'est à eux de réfléchir aux solutions qui vont pouvoir améliorer leurs conditions et leur qualité de vie, ainsi que de santé. Et donc, c'est très important pour nous d'aller chercher cette information-là de la part de la population. Et donc, à travers les années, on a mis en place plusieurs expériences d'opérations populaires d'aménagement, qui sont des exercices d'urbanisme participatif, où on rassemble la communauté, on fait des expériences, des visites de quartier, on réfléchit à des diagnostics de territoire pour essayer de comprendre c'est quoi les grands enjeux de développement dans le quartier, pour essayer de se promener, aller voir certaines sections qui sont un peu plus méconnues, disons. Et donc, on a fait une première expérience qui a eu lieu en 2004 qui avait pour but d'améliorer le cadre de vie du quartier habité, le cœur du quartier à Pointe-Saint-Charles. En 2007, on a eu une deuxième expérience qui s'est faite cette fois-ci sur un terrain qui était en redéveloppement à l'extrême sud du quartier, qui étaient les anciens terrains du CN, du Canadien national, qui avaient été vendus pour la somme modique de 1 $ au groupe MAC, qui avait en échange besoin de réhabiliter ces terrains-là, de les décontaminer, parce qu'il y avait des activités industrielles qui avaient eu lieu là. Et donc, la communauté s'est rassemblée pour essayer de proposer une vision alternative de développement pour ce secteur-là du quartier en réponse aux besoins locaux. Et donc, ce que ces expériences-là nous ont appris, c'est qu'avec une certaine constance et une détermination du milieu communautaire, on est capable de faire des gains importants face à des intérêts privés qui semblent vraiment très, très, très puissant, très, très omniprésent dans la vague de développement urbain qui a lieu à Montréal et donc qui, eux, se positionnent en tant que les bâtisseurs de la ville de demain. Et donc, pour nous, le rôle citoyen, c'est un peu de venir confronter cette vision-là qui est transmise par ces grands intérêts immobiliers privés et de dire que non seulement on a des idées concrètes et pertinentes à mettre en place à Pointe-Saint-Charles, mais c'est celles qui vont répondre le plus à nos besoins. Donc, ces expériences-là nous ont appris là, un peu ces éléments-là. Plus récemment, depuis 2-3 ans maintenant, tous les regards se tournent vers le secteur de développement Bridge-Bonaventure, qui est un secteur industriel situé à l'est du quartier habité de Pointe-Saint-Charles. Là, je n'ai pas vraiment de carte devant moi, mais vous irez faire une petite recherche sur Google pour ceux qui sont moins familiers avec Pointe-Saint-Charles. C'est un tout petit quartier très enclavé entre le canal de la Chine, des infrastructures routières, autoroutières et ferroviaires qui un peu encadrent et encerclent le quartier, qui font qu'on est un peu prisonnier, si on veut, de ces différentes contraintes-là de transport. Et donc, ce secteur Bridge-Bonaventure-là, qui est présentement désaffecté, qui est encore un secteur industriel, mais qui est en voie de requalification, il convoite tous les regards, tous les usages, puisqu'il se situe à proximité du centre-ville. Et entre autres, ce qu'on regarde depuis les dernières années, c'est des promoteurs immobiliers. Dans ce cas-ci, c'est le groupe de Vimco, ainsi que le groupe Baseball Montréal, qui est dirigé par le milliardaire Stephen Brofman. Ils ont ciblé une portion de ce secteur-là pour un développement privé qui vise à se rapatrier des terrains publics qui appartiennent au gouvernement fédéral à une société fédérale qui s'appelle la Société immobilière du Canada, ou Canada Lands Company, qui possède un grand lot de terrain près du bassin Peel. Et leur objectif, c'est de développer un méga projet immobilier de 4 à 5 000 unités de condominium, la construction d'un nouveau stade de baseball pour éventuellement acquérir une demi-équipe qui proviendrait de la Floride. Donc, il y a encore des rumeurs qui circulent à ce niveau-là. Et ainsi qu'un centre d'investissement en technologie verte. Donc, c'est un méga projet qui vient s'insérer dans le quartier de Pointe-Saint-Charles et qui va vraisemblablement venir changer la dynamique de développement du secteur pour les 10-20 prochaines années. Et donc, pour nous, à Pointe-Saint-Charles, c'était important qu'on vienne se positionner relativement au développement de ce secteur-là, non seulement face aux intérêts immobiliers privés, mais face à la ville de Montréal, qui a également un rôle à jouer dans la construction d'une vision d'ensemble, une vision cohérente du développement urbain de ce milieu-là, de ce quartier-là. Et donc, c'est dans cette optique qu'on a mis en place notre 3e opération populaire d'aménagement sur le secteur Bridge-Bonaventure. Là, j'ai quelques photos que je voulais vous partager pour un peu vous montrer. Donc, normalement, vous devriez voir ça. Ça va, Jason? You can see these. Yeah, okay, cool. On a fait plusieurs exercices donc de construction de panneaux d'information qui visent à ce que les gens s'approprient un peu plus le secteur, qui prennent connaissance de quoi il est constitué, de quoi il en est question, c'est quoi les enjeux de développement urbain qui ont lieu, puis on invite la population à venir un peu se comprendre. Et donc, on a fait cette Open Door Event qu'on appelle cette journée porte ouverte pour venir un peu récolter les commentaires des gens, les commentaires initiaux de qu'est-ce qu'ils pensent qui devrait être intégré dans cette planification urbaine de ce secteur de aventure-là. Et ça nous permet d'avoir une espèce, ça c'est une carte qui vous permet de voir, c'est vraiment juste la section le plus au nord-est du quartier Pointe-Saint-Charles, juste l'autre bord de la rivière plutôt, du canal de la Chine, cet espace-là ici en haut à gauche, c'est Griffintown de l'autre côté. Donc on voit que c'est un secteur qui est très très près des grands projets immobiliers qui ont lieu à Montréal actuellement. Puis bon, ça nous permet également de faire des visites guidées, des manifestations, donc rassembler du monde, puis un peu réfléchir à comment est-ce qu'on peut créer une nouvelle vocation pour ce site Internet, pour ce secteur-là plutôt. Donc, un peu des visites guidées qu'on faisait avec des historiens du quartier qui venaient parler un peu des enjeux patrimoniaux et de l'historique de développement du secteur qui a été éminemment proche. Donc, on voit en arrière à la Farine ADM avec l'enseigne typique de Montréal, Farine Five Roses. Et on termine ça avec une grande rencontre citoyenne qui était notre opération populaire d'aménagement qui a récolté une centaine de participants à travers une vingtaine de semaines de temps où là, on est autour de cartes, de croquis, de dessins, puis on vise à construire, à développer cette vision de développement-là, cette vision d'ensemble pour le secteur. Donc, on a créé 6 équipes de conception différentes qui se sont venues pour présenter un peu leurs intérêts, leurs différentes suggestions relativement au secteur. Donc, on parlait et de transport, d'habitation, de parcs espaces verts, d'accès aux fleuves. Donc, un peu tout était traité. Puis ça a été un moment très dynamique et très important pour la communauté de se rassembler et d'apporter ses propres solutions aux enjeux qui sont identifiés localement. Donc, ça vous montre un peu, il y avait des maquettes qui étaient présentes, donc on avait même fait une expérience avec les enfants, donc plutôt que d'avoir juste une garderie avec des enfants qui sont là en attendant que les parents réfléchissent, bien, les enfants étaient invités à réfléchir aussi à l'aménagement de le quartier avec peut-être un exercice un peu plus différent et qui a donné un résultat intéressant où les jeunes sont venus à inventer comment je vois mon quartier de proximité, c'est quoi les services essentiels que je vois dans ce milieu de vie-là qu'on souhaite bâtir. Fait que ça apportait en tout cas, un aperçu très intéressant vis-à-vis de ce que les parents un peu plus réfléchissaient ou les personnes, les adultes. Ici, une photo très heureuse de gens qui sont contents de terminer cet exercice. Donc, pour poursuivre mon explication, c'est qu'on a fait un paquet de ces réflexions-là de façon collective, puis on a transposé ça dans un projet collectif qui est disponible sur le site Internet. Je pourrais vous faire un lien dans l'espace de clavardage de chat afterwards. Puis on a réussi à présenter et à construire cette vision de projet collectif-là et la présenter lors des consultations de l'Office de consultation publique de Montréal, l'OCPM, qui organisait des consultations sur ce secteur-là. On a fait des assemblées électorales lors des élections fédérales, les dernières plutôt, je pense que c'était en 2019, si je ne me trompe pas. La production d'un journal porte-à-porte qu'on a diffusé à travers le quartier récemment pour un peu informer les gens qui habitent Pointe-Saint-Charles, mais qu'est-ce qui advient de ce secteur-là, puis comment est-ce qu'on peut s'impliquer dans les prises de position publiques relativement à l'avenir de ce secteur. Et d'ailleurs, on a une action citoyenne qui s'en vient ce samedi. Si le beau temps est de notre est de la partie, parce que présentement, il annonce un petit peu de pluie, puis ça me stresse un peu, mais on a une action citoyenne qui est en place ce samedi, puis ça va avoir lieu à Pointe-Saint-Charles, sur le site du bassin Peel. Vous êtes toutes et tous invités à y participer. Je pourrais voir pour vous mettre également le lien dans l'espace clavardage, si jamais ça vous intéresse de nous voir en vrai, puis d'un peu d'en apprendre davantage, parce que là, je sais que c'est 10 minutes, puis peut-être que j'ai déjà passé un petit peu de temps, mais je vais essayer d'accélérer un petit peu plus. Donc, notre projet collectif, on le voyait vraiment entre autres, la création d'un milieu de vie qui se veut complet, accessible, inclusif et à échelle humaine. Donc, il comporte des logements sociaux et communautaires, des services de proximité, une école secondaire, des équipements sportifs publics, à l'opposé d'un stade immobilier privé, On a réfléchi également à la reconfiguration des infrastructures routières pour essayer d'éliminer la circulation de transit, qui a un impact très fort sur le quartier. Donc, les véhicules qui essaient de circuler par les petites rues résidentielles pour essayer de se sauver du trafic, ainsi que de favoriser, de prioriser des déplacements en transport actif et collectif dans ce nouveau milieu de vie-là qu'on est en train de créer. On a également réfléchi à l'accès au fleuve, incluant l'aménagement d'un parc linéaire, de verdissement massif et la création de corridors de biodiversité entre les canals de la Chine et le fleuve Saint-Laurent. On a pensé également à la protection des emplois en activité, le développement de nouveaux pôles technologiques en une économie verte, durable et circulaire dans l'écoparc d'entreprise de Pointe St, qui est un parc d'entreprise qui se situe juste au sud des voies du CN et près de l'autoroute Bonaventure, en fait. Et finalement, on a pensé à réfléchir également aux enjeux de préservation et de mise en valeur du patrimoine industriel du secteur, parce qu'il est très omniprésent et ça serait très, très dommage de tout raser pour construire des tours immobiliers en hauteur qui ont une autre vocation et qui ne font fi un peu du passé. Donc, pour nous, cette intégration urbaine-là est très importante et était significative à mettre en place. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on voit lorsqu'on compare un peu ces deux projets-là? C'est qu'on se demande, en fin de compte, c'est qui contrôle le développement de la ville? Parce que lorsqu'il y a deux visions contradictoires complètement qui s'affrontent comme ça, c'est à qui de décider c'est quoi la vision qui doit être de l'avant. Puis pour nous, la Ville de Montréal a un rôle à jouer à ce niveau-là. Et elle doit le faire de manière de plus en plus prépondérante. Parce que pour l'instant, sa réaction, elle est assez timide, notamment en réaction aux recommandations de l'ECPM. Tout simplement, ce qu'elle a dit, c'est qu'elle a invité le groupe Baseball Montréal à refaire ses devoirs puis à présenter un projet gagnant qui répondrait un peu à toutes les considérations qui étaient transcrites dans le rapport de l'ECPM. Alors, pour nous, c'est une phrase vide de sens. Il y a comme un manque de leadership de la ville pour essayer d'imposer ou de proposer sa vision de développement pour ce secteur-là. Et c'est un manque de leadership qu'on remarque à plusieurs échelles à travers Montréal, puisque la ville a des outils urbanistiques, ses plans d'urbanisme, ses PPU, ses plans d'ensemble, son règlement sur les plans d'intégration et d'architectural. Donc, elle a un paquet d'outils urbanistiques qui lui permettent de définir, de mettre en place une vision d'ensemble, d'orienter les interventions d'aménagement qui vont avoir lieu sur ce secteur-là. Mais au contraire, ce qu'on voit bien souvent, c'est que la ville est toujours en mode réaction par rapport à des projets immobiliers privés. Donc, elle souhaite apporter des nuances ou effectuer des modifications réglementaires pour essayer de faciliter l'intégration de ces projets privés-là ou tirer parti des opportunités de négociation. Puis ça, on le voit beaucoup, que ce soit avec le site de la brasserie Molson plus récemment, qui est un exercice qui est un peu plus intéressant que d'autres. Le site Royal Mount à Ville-Mont-Royal, qui a été beaucoup médiatisé, où la ville est un peu complètement en réaction et pas du tout préparée à faire face à un projet de ce type-là. L'hôpital Children's de Montréal, dans le secteur un peu plus au nord du centre-ville de où est-ce qu'on est, qui était supposé avoir une école publique des logements sociaux et une bibliothèque. Finalement, on en aura une des trois, c'est la bibliothèque qui passe, puis les deux autres sont un peu sautés, mis de côté, parce qu'on n'a pas le temps d'attendre. Il faut développer le secteur, puis ce qui prédomine pour l'investissement, c'est le développement résidentiel, c'est le condominium. Et donc, la ville est toujours en mode réactif vis-à-vis de ces projets-là, et donc, on ne voit pas un leadership fort de son côté. Et de ce fait, c'est un peu les promoteurs immobiliers qui dictent la nature des grands projets d'aménagement et les investissements à cibler, non seulement en termes de projets, mais en termes de où est-ce qu'on va les cibler à l'intérieur des territoires de la ville. Donc, pour nous, c'est un enjeu majeur parce que il n'y a pas de vision municipale, puis la ville gère un peu ses dossiers un à un en fonction des priorités, des urgences ou des annonces publiques qui sont faites, plutôt qu'avoir un portrait ou une vision d'ensemble de c'est où le prochain développement à Montréal, puis comment on peut le planifier pour pas maintenant, mais dans les 10 prochaines années, parce que c'est quelque chose qui se fait à long terme, puis ça nous évite de rentrer dans un mode réaction ou réactif. Thanks for the 2-minute warning, Jason. C'est ça. Puis ce qu'on voit également, c'est que l'élément de la faiblesse dans la planification urbaine de la Ville de Montréal, elle résulte de deux fois. Une chose, c'est qu'on voit qu'il y a un manque de pouvoir qui est accordé au palier municipal dans la question de l'urbanisme, spécifiquement sur la question de l'habitation ou le développement de logements sociaux, où elle est un peu contrainte de répondre aux programmes qui sont mis en place par Québec, par le gouvernement provincial. Mais à côté de ça, on voit qu'il y a également un manque de leadership ou un manque de volonté politique de se doter d'une réglementation contraignante, d'un peu challenger la loi sur l'aménagement et l'urbanisme pour essayer de voir, y a-t-il des manières qu'on peut prendre nos outils à notre disposition, puis essayer de créer un cadre légal et une jurisprudence qui favoriserait l'intégration d'une nouvelle façon de concevoir la ville et comment est-ce qu'elle est construite. Donc ça, il y a un peu un manque d'imagination, un peu de manque de créativité de la ville à cet égard-là. Ce qu'on peut comprendre parce qu'elle essaie des trucs, des fois, on l'a vu avec dans l'Est de Montréal avec Transport Raymond dans la cité de la logistique qui n'a pas été très marquant et donc maintenant qu'elle se fait poursuivre en cours pour un montant que je ne me souviens plus, mais c'est plusieurs millions de dollars pour un peu avoir tenté de freiner ce projet-là. Ça ne marque pas toujours, mais on aimerait ça que ça arrive plus souvent, puis on aimerait ça être plus partie prenante de ces discussions et de ces décisions-là parce que c'est, grosso modo, ça va affecter nos quartiers, ça va affecter les populations qui y habitent. Donc, pour défendre le droit à la ville, c'est primordial, en conclusion, c'est primordial qu'on défende d'avant tout le droit au quartier parce que c'est la première forme de résistance qu'on peut s'organiser localement avec les gens qui ont un impact concret sur la communauté et qui ont un impact concret sur qu'est-ce qui va se passer dans leur entourage. C'est très difficile de mobiliser des gens de Pointe St pour aller militer sur le développement de l'hippodrome à Côte-des-Neiges. Les gens n'ont pas cette notion de distance-là et d'impact de leur environnement. Donc, c'est très important de s'organiser localement, mais également de se réseauter à l'échelle régionale entre les différents acteurs qui travaillent sur les différents projets pour essayer de comprendre, bon, c'est quoi les stratégies à mettre en place, c'est quoi les tactiques de négociation à mettre en place, tant avec le milieu privé, tant avec le milieu municipal. Et donc, il y a plusieurs formes de résistance qui s'organisent présentement à Montréal. On a des mobilisations et des contestations de diverses initiatives de promoteurs immobiliers qui ont peu ou pas de retombées locales pour le quartier, des luttes contre les rénovictions par des pressions politiques et la défense des droits des locataires. On fait également des représentations auprès des grands propriétaires publics pour essayer de réserver des terrains à des fins collectives dans tous les quartiers montréalais, parce que tous se face, particulièrement les quartiers centraux, mais font face à ces enjeux, à ces défis-là d'aménagement. Et également, on voit la pression qu'on doit accorder pour promouvoir l'accès à des locaux communautaires, notamment sur les artères commerciales qui sont en transformation, qui a un certain effet de gentrification commerciale qui s'exerce, qui un peu sort les commerces ou les entreprises qui sont un peu moins rentables pour cet espace-là, puis un peu créer des conditions qui sont un peu particulières pour le développement d'une typologie commerciale qui est très unique et très huppée. Donc, pour nous, c'est ça. Cette facette de résistance-là, elle est multiple, elle est diverse. Ça passe par la mobilisation de la population, par l'information et l'éducation populaire qui est très important pour un peu impliquer les gens puis savoir pourquoi est-ce qu'on s'implique et pas juste impliquer nous pour impliquer nous. C'est plus facile d'impliquer des militants que d'impliquer la population en général, mais c'est la population en général qui va nous aider à concevoir qu'il y ait vraiment une position claire et nette dans le quartier vis-à-vis un projet et pour une vision de développement qui prend en compte leurs intérêts. Donc, pour ça, ça prend de l'éducation populaire, ça prend beaucoup de réflexion, de discussion et d'échange. C'est des éléments qui prennent du temps à mettre en place, qui prennent du temps à faire, mais c'est éminemment essentiel pour mettre en place une stratégie gagnante relativement à ça. Je vais m'arrêter à ça, puis si jamais on pourra avoir des questions, des discussions, puis I know Patrick has a presentation as well that I would like to share to you afterwards. Donc, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Cédric. That was a great presentation that I feel like captures the spirit of this book insofar as we touched on so many issues, not only within Pointe St. Charles, but that relate to the entire island of Montreal. So very much appreciate that presentation. If you have questions specific to Cédric and you don't want to forget them, you can write them in the chat. I'll take note of them and we'll ask them at the end. But next, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick Barnard, who is going to give a brief presentation in relation to his essay on green spaces. And also, I hope he talks a bit about what he's doing with the Pimento report, which is a great resource for Montrealers who want to learn about many of the issues that are going on in our city. So with that, Patrick, you can go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Jason. Je m'appelle Patrick Barnard. Je fais partie du conseil de la Coalition verte. C'est une organisation environnementale non partisane ici à Montréal. Et je vais essayer de faire peut-être des ponts. Il y a beaucoup de convergences parmi les thèmes qu'on va discuter. Alors, je vais faire mon mieux. Je suis très content que ce livre soit publié. C'est énormément instructif. Le chapitre que j'ai écrit est une petite histoire des espaces naturels sur l'île de Montréal depuis à peu près 1970. Mon constat principal, c'est très simple, c'est l'étalement urbain qui a déterminé le développement urbain de Montréal. Et au même temps, l'étalement urbain a causé la destruction des espaces naturels. C'est quelque chose qu'on peut voir très, très clairement. Alors, c'est un processus infernal de développement immobilier et la dévastation de la nature. Et aussi, j'aimerais saisir un mot que Cédric a employé. C'est la timidité de la ville. Ça, c'est une faute politique et une faute morale. Je vais parler de ça peut-être un peu plus tard dans la partie anglaise de ma présentation. Il y a un autre point important, et c'est quelque chose que moi, je dois dire, j'étais dans les tranchées pendant 10 ans au conseil de la ville ici à Montréal. J'ai vu beaucoup de choses, je connais les gens. Au plan de l'environnement, la période Coder était de loin la pire période pendant ce temps moderne. Nous avons tous des réserves au sujet du projet Montréal, cette question de timidité, mais Denis Coderre ne doit pas être le maire de Montréal pour un deuxième mandat. Il était absolument terrible pour l'environnement et sur plusieurs autres plans. At the beginning of this book, I'm now going to switch into English. I have this duality in me, you know, the old Montreal duality. Sorry about that, guys. At the beginning of Montreal, A Citizen's Guide to City Politics, Mostafa, Henaway, Jason Prince, Eric Shragge, in the chapter Power and the City, it's well worth reading, refer to the work of Samuel Stein. He wrote a book called Capital City, Gentrification and the Real Estate State. It's a very important book. And they also refer to the geographer David Harvey. He's referred to in a number of chapters in the Citizen's Guide. And both Stein and Harvey point to a crucial pattern for many cities in the world. And for Montreal right now, I've seen this firsthand. Believe me, it's not happy. When classic industrial investment leaves with the disappearing industries of a city like Montreal, money moves into land and real estate development. And the French economist Thomas Piketty has described the enormous concentration of wealth in the Western world now. We're back to the 1890s in terms of inequalities. So what do we have? We have a small number of people with tons of cash in a low interest rate environment. This money goes into stocks, but above all, into land and real estate development. It's a juggernaut. This book, A Citizen's Guide, describes the big private players in the land game here in Montreal. You should read that chapter. It's important to know their names so we can see what they're doing. But the book also points to those corporatist, I use that word in the Italian sense, corporatist organizations that funnel our savings in the same direction. I'm talking about the Caisse de dépôt, the Fonds de Solidarité, and in Ontario, of course, the Ontario Teachers Fund, the biggest real estate developer in Canada and the owner of Cadillac Fairview. In chapter after chapter of this book, A Citizen's Guide, we see this weight weighing on Montreal. Linda Goulai's analysis, Power and City Hall, trenchantly shows, I think, how this power system has shaped this city through successive periods. This is what we all face. You can feel it in the air when you come up against these powerful interests. The REM is a creature of the Caisse de dépôt. It is a deeply, deeply anti-environmental project. And you can see in Pointe Claire, the Cadillac Fairview, Pointe Claire, it's over there in the western part of the city. But if you look at what's going on there, it's illustrative. There's a beautiful forest called Fairview Forest, and Cadillac Fairview, owned by Ontario Teachers, wants to destroy Fairview Forest and build a mini city right on top of it next to the future REM station. This, right before our eyes, is this classic pattern of urban sprawl in Montreal that I'm choosing my words carefully, that has produced ecocide here. Ecocide is the destruction of the environment. And Montreal, I don't know if you know this, people, but it's the Canadian champion of urban sprawl, okay? All of those nice little houses with the trees and the grass and everything, they're eating up natural spaces. In my chapter, I state my belief that the Plante administration has both changed Montreal's environmental history for the better, that has simultaneously remained a prisoner of that very history itself. This is the root of this timidity that Cédric talked about. It's been pretty awful in the last years. I think Projet Montréal is better than that, if I may say so. Now, Sylvia Algermark talked to me today. She's a co-founder of the Green Coalition. She's the woman who knows the history of the natural spaces in Montreal best of anyone I know in the whole island. She gave me a quote. I want to quote her, if I may. Quote, this is Sylvia Algermark, environmental expert, if I can put it that way. Quote, if Valérie Plante had not created the Great Western Park at L'Anse-à-L'Homme in the western part of Montreal Island, that whole area would have been eaten away. Now it will not. It will be preserved. She's done more than anyone else in recent decades for the natural environment. That's a huge contribution, but it should not stop there. At risk right now are the Technopark wetlands area, 200 hectares, the size of Mount Royal Park, north of the airport. That must be protected. It is so much at risk, and it must not be sacrificed, close quote. Now, this is where you see this timidity that Cédric talked about. It was very good. Projet Montréal bought out Mr. Grilly's 140 hectares of wet meadows out there in the west. But as soon as they come downtown and they come up against Quebec Inc., the Caisse de Dépôt, the big money boys, then Projet Montréal runs scared, okay, which is a great shame because it doesn't do any good to cater to these interests, frankly, okay? They're going to do their thing no matter what. Green Coalition is now working very hard, talking to federal officials and others to save the Technopark wetland system, to save the monarch butterfly fields that are going to be destroyed. Can you imagine? We have precious monarch butterfly. There's a bloody industrial plant that's going to be put on top of them. And we were promised by federal officials that that would not happen. They broke their word to us because guess what? This pattern of land development is stronger than governments. Governments need to stand up to it. And they need to stand up to it in the case of the Technopark, which many of you may not know about, but it's a very rare area ecologically because the federal government owns most of that land. The city of Montreal also owns a significant section of the Technopark marshes. It's an integrated ecological system, but frankly, it's quite scared of the real estate interests that are lurking over that whole area next to the future REM station, whose tunnel is being dug now under these wetland marshes, if you can believe that folly, okay? This is what's wrong with our city, digging a tunnel for a very questionable project right under marshes. Now, the Technopark is where you can see the Plante administration as a prisoner of the very history it has sought to change, and it really has. Now, I would say I like Valérie Plante. I think her heart is in the right place. But Montreal, despite its grace, is a very tough little city, big city, I guess. Now, there's two things that I talked about, a convergence des idées. Environmentalists need something that people need in the city. We need a publicly supported major campaign for good housing for people who can't afford housing normally, okay? We need social housing because if we had social housing, then the developers wouldn't get away with what is clearly murder of the environment, and I would say very serious damage to citizens, okay? Cédric talked about Rosemount, he talked about Cabot Square, he talked about all of these places where people are being hurt right now. And the other thing that we should have is a serious protection of nature. Projet did that with the Great Western Park, but then once it starts moving over to the middle of the island, or let's say Anjou, there was supposed to be un grand parc dans l'est de la ville, OK? Un grand parc dans ce secteur-là. Mais il y a des gens là avec beaucoup de pièces. C'est ça le problème. So, my friends, not a very original set of ideas, familiar ones to you. We face a great challenge. This book is a wonderful tool to carry out our work. And I'm doing this for free. I don't expect a fee for that endorsement. The endorsement is genuine.
I'm going to be transcribing some of that and putting it on the back of the book. You can count on it.
Good. You're welcome to it.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was a great contribution to this discussion. Very much appreciate you joining us today and sharing your thoughts. I want to briefly just give a shout out to Rose Dyson, who is one of our authors at Black Rose Books, who just commented in our chat. Rose recently published a book called Mind Abuse, which is very good. So that's just a quick Black Rose Books pitch. You can find that book on our new website. But getting back to what we're all here for, I wanted to go ahead and hand it over next to Mostafa Henaway, who is an editor of this book. He works for the Immigrant Workers Center, and he's becoming a very familiar face to me as I work with the editors on getting this book out there and sharing it around and doing some other organizing. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say, Mostafa. If there are any questions you want to ask the other speakers in the conclusion of your talk, feel free, because when Mostafa concludes, we'll move into a Q&A period. So go ahead.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you very much, Patrick and Cédric. You actually kind of took most of what I was going to say, and Patrick gave a very good overview of the entirety of the book. But also, very much, I guess, this project has been a labor of love, especially more for Eric and Jason, who's this was their conception and gave birth to this idea and to this book project. I initially was brought on as a research assistant, and then eventually brought on as one of the editors. And I think, and the kind of the comments I want to make today, I mean, we're covered by both, but also some additions, right? And particularly the question is sort of why this book and why this book project now. And this book project, was conceived of, 3 years ago, right? And maybe between the two of them, I don't even want to guess, right? But when we started meeting, there was an actual particular political moment that you can begin to see a phenomenon across the advanced capitalist world, the global north, particularly in the era of Trump. We saw this with Legault and CAC, where you begin to see this depolarization between a progressive city politic, new alliances, electoral victories that weren't conceivable at the municipal level, and at the same time, this starkly different kind of politics of the fervor of right-wing nationalism at national levels, right? With Brexit, or whether it be here with Legault and CAC, whether it be Trump in the United States, and that confrontation that we began to see really between a new kind of progressive, transformative urban politics and that, the contrast that we saw at the national level, and that it was important to deal with that question, and that for social movements and for progressives, that the municipal and the urban was a central issue, right? This was a key thing for us, that it wasn't just about the politics at the Quebec level or at the federal level, but at the Montreal level, that it was vitally important with us to deal with that question and to deal with Projet Montréal, right? And that it wasn't simply to sort of kind of just cheerlead Projet Montréal, but to actually kind of delve into the issues that we face, in terms of kind of the crises that were really covered by Patrick and Cédric, right? That, we see these issues kind of come to the fore, and sometimes they don't appear to be as municipal issues or as urban issues, right? Whether it be the crisis of policing and the protests of Black Lives Matter and defunding the police, whether it be the ways in which global capitalism has fundamentally changed, right? And this idea that the real estate state, or the fact that we now have these growth coalitions that are inevitably creating this crisis of housing that we're facing, and exposes the kind of crisis of inequality that we face, right? And in Montreal, what we're actually witnessing is a local aspect of a global phenomenon, right? And that in Montreal, what we're facing, this crisis of housing, is actually not a crisis. It's a manufactured crisis where the only way where capital now can generate profit, in Stein's book, he makes the argument that 60% of capital now is invested into real estate, where the old industrial titans like Bronfman, like Lieberman's and AEDN, which is the real estate arm of Lemoore Textile Inc., or whether Brevia, which was also the arm of another textile giant, whether it be the Caisse de dépôt de Québec, with now its real estate project, should also be seen as an industrial capital, even though it's collectively owned. It owns, it owns infrastructure projects. It's the largest investor in Dollarama. It actually owned that pipeline, was one of the largest shareholders in the pipeline on the West Coast that went, or in the East Coast that, that went down from that cyber attack. Actually, CBDQ is actually one of the largest owners of that pipeline. So in a way, those creating that crisis of housing here are those same, it's that movement of capital towards real estate, right? And these developments are reshaping our city, right? And the ways that Cédric and Patrick talked about, and we try to explore that throughout the book, as discussed. So the idea is the ways in which whole swaths of our city are being now, we see this confrontation, and that's the framework of our book, really, right? And that's what we're trying to bring out, and that this is going to be the question that Projet Montréal, or any elected official, or any social movement's going to have to confront, whether we're talking about the questions of the environment and the ownership of land, whether we're talking about the questions of transportation, and the fact when we think about these questions of transportation in the book, one of the authors, Joël Houry, discusses how 40% of the emissions emitted from the city of Montreal are transport related, right? That only 28% of those are industrial, and it dwindles and dwindles. But the fact that car is king in our city, fundamentally, is an urban problem, is a municipal problem, but it's also tied to the questions of housing. Where do people live? How do people live? What kind of housing options do people have? Why do we have suburban flight? Why isn't the city a livable space for working class people and families anymore? Why are people driven out to RDP or to the South Shore? So the question of really the right to the city and the ownership of the city becomes fundamental. And that confrontation of power is really the framework that we try to put forward in the book, right? And that this is one of the key issues that we try to present, that it's not about any one elected official, it's not simply about a platform, it's not about any one party, but that actually our city is fundamentally shaped by movements and by that confrontation of power, right? Between the interests of capital, whether it be the real estate developers, finance, or that of communities, of local community organizations, of neighborhood organizations, or broad social movements like the climate justice strike, or whether it be Black Lives Matter, or whether it be the student strike in 2012, all of them. And then in that space, that we have to view electoral politics, and that's what we have to view Projet Montréal within as well, right? And that's kind of the framework that we put forward in the book. And that, so the city isn't just, a sideline issue for those of us thinking about social transformation. The city is key. It's key to dealing with climate. It's key to dealing with global capitalism and inequality. It's key to dealing with the questions of structural racism. It's key to dealing with the questions of the right to housing. So fundamentally, and public ownership, the future of our economy. So all of these things are explored in the book, but and they're all fundamentally urban issues. But those issues can't solely be done through an electoral project, right? That what we try to offer in the book is an analysis that because power shapes City Hall, the city's fundamentally, and especially in the Canadian context or the Quebec context, the city of Montreal is constrained. It's not simply the lapdog, of capital, while, I think it would be, but cities' fundings are fundamentally shaped by the revenue by property taxes, right? This is a key, the single major source. So in a way, Projet Montréal is trapped in its own contradiction. How can it provide affordable housing when most of its revenue comes from the value of property, right? And that as a commodity, right? So it's fundamentally trapped in its own paradox. The constitutional challenges or changes that would need to be done to fundamentally give Montreal the ability, or us as residents within Montreal, the ability to have real decision-making power over our lives. So I think there are these institutional and these structural constraints that Projet Montréal actually has to deal with. And I think, and one of the things that we try to offer in this book and through all of the authors is that it's not all doom and, it's not all doom and gloom, right? It's not all the despair that we're confronted with, in terms of all of the crises that we face, right? That Patrick said it, this fighting little city or fighting big city, right? And that, the examples of Pointe St. Charles, time and time again, especially this neighborhood, right? And the ways that they've been able to organize, whether it be to stop the casino, whether it be to truly confront this coalition. This is really David and Goliath. We're not talking about a small grouping of real estate developers. We're talking about truly the 1% of this city and their allies, who are confronting this working class popular neighborhood. And this working class popular neighborhood is winning, right? And so, when we write about the neighborhoods such as, there are chapters to talk about Milton Park and the examples of the neighborhood organizing there that have continued to this day, not just the legacies of the past, but to this very moment. And also new neighborhoods that are emerging, right? And the problem with this book is the more that we kept going, the more we wanted to include, where the book explores Montreal North in the way that after the shooting of Reddy Villaneva, those protests led to the creation of institutions such as Hoodstock, neighborhood organizing to build counterpower. But beyond that, other neighborhoods like Park Extension are beginning to do the same and are beginning to create victories on these local levels. But all of that being said, what we try to offer when you take this bird's eye view, we need to think about this way at the municipal level, that we simply, we need to bring our forces together, right? Because they have their alliances. All of these developers have their alliances, right? The Institut de Développement de Urbain, this growth coalition between all of the developers that try to influence policy, the constraints that municipal parties face, that our power is actually together as a coalition of forces. Well, that's never really easy. How do we make the links between protecting the marshlands and also protecting Peel Basin, right? How do we make the connections between defunding the police and also the right to cooperative housing, right? How do we make these connections? And I think one of the ways, by viewing the city as this vessel, as this space of where power is really manifested, it's about this radical vision, this radical democratic vision of the city. Who does it belong to and who doesn't it belong to? Does it belong to the interests like Stephen Bronfman? Or does it belong to the residents on Wellington, or the people who live at Henry Bourassa? And I think this is a way that we can actually bring, and this is offered in the book by all the editors. How do we, that we all have to come together to take the city, right? Prenons la ville, right? And this is, I think Jason put it in the actual chat, but and this is one of those initiatives, and that's what we offer. So this book wasn't just only a tool to bring together people who are on the ground, who are analyzing these seismic shifts in our city, but also to hopefully provide, not a definitive roadmap, but to provide some insights based on the experiences of all the contributors, and I guess all of our own experiences of not just making the city an critical space for social movements, but then how are we actually going to get there, right? And obviously those thoughts are the shortest because they're in the conclusion. We didn't want to give you a 500-page book. We could have, but we kept it shorter. So please, but the idea was really to set out to say we have this rich history and moment of movements in the city of Montreal. And if we can bring them together, not only can we take the city, and not only can we push the demands of the residents of Montreal, but that by doing so, we can also fundamentally not just take the city, but confront and build a decent city for all of us, and deal with the urgent crises that we face, whether it be economic, political, climate, racism, and so that really this is what the book and what we hope to contribute to the debate in the contemporary moment, especially in this election coming up. And so I urge people to really get the book, but then also to read the contributions, but also to take part in the events and to take part in Prenons la ville as well, because it's really, I think for us, it's the practical expression of what we were trying to do with this book. Thank you again. Also, a big thank you to, there's also Jason Toney, who's been working a lot, and Dimitri, who's been, there since the beginning, and, in conversation with all of us as the editors, and then other contributors who are here as well. Norma, I'm pointing to Norma like I'm in a room with Norma, but I'm actually just pointing to the box that says Norma, which you can't see. Patrick Gagnon, who's like actually, he's endless beautiful words for Patrick, because he's kept this process along and helped us to really get the book out there. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. I don't know if Jason or Eric have anything to add. But.
Thank you so much, Mostafa. All I have to say after that is, if you weren't going to buy the book before, I think you probably will now. So thank you, Eric. Sorry, Mostafa, for that on behalf of Black Rose Books. That was really great. So it's time for a discussion period, some Q&A. I will point to the chat, and so you can use that for questions. And also, Prenons la ville was linked to the website by Claudia Leduc. Thank you. So if you're interested in joining that coalition of neighborhood groups, feel free to check out that website. If you have a question, you can use the reaction button to raise your hand, or let me know in chat, or type your question into chat. I'm also watching on YouTube if you want to write anything there. Did I see a physical hand raise by Jason Prince, or did I imagine that? Well, Jason, if you want, pipe in, but if I didn't see that correctly, then we have a question. We'll start with audience members because I have questions, but I'll save them. Nicolas? Chevalier?
I get to break the ice.
Oui.
Okay. Wonderful to see so many familiar faces, unfortunately on Zoom, but this summer, hopefully we'll be doing another book launch in the park. Wink, wink. Yeah, I've spoken with Mostafa and Mei Chu through another event before about this, but I was wondering if people saw potential in sort of direct organizing around mutual aid that was always present, but has emerged to a more mainstream format during the pandemic. And if the efforts they've seen in Montreal could be a promising a seed for future organizing that could see this sort of bloom. Thank you.
Any of the presenters are welcome to jump in and to answer that.
Can we do a bunch of questions and then
sure, let's do that. Okay,
respond?
That's a good idea. So Campbell Stewart, go ahead.
Okay, just a real quick question. Well, to start with, thanks very much for this, and thanks very much for the book. I'm really looking forward to reading it, which really is my question. When do you think it will be delivered?
I'll tell you what the state of the book is. So the English is, we're doing page layout. I have a couple little tweaks to do on the conclusion. So we're just about there. The English could be out fairly soon, within weeks. The French one is taking a bit longer. We got chapters in both languages. So we had to translate back and forth, and because the three of us as co-editors can't really do the French properly. We have outside people doing it, and it's a bit behind, and we hope to have the French out by the end of July. So both should be out in the next, month or so. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Jason Prince?
Yes, I have a question for Cédric and for everybody in the room. So Cédric, you mentioned the urbanisme participatif, like building with the neighborhood an urban plan. I know there are two other examples. My question is, do we know of any other examples? Because this can be a very powerful way to take control of the urban planning process. There's one in Centre-Sud. They've done it several iterations. And when the city was ready to make the urban plan back at the time, they literally took the citizens' urban plan and adopted it almost without change. Another example is from Park X. There's been now 3 major urban plans that have been developed, less successful uptake into the official urban plan. But I wonder if you know of any other examples. One of the holes in our book is that we don't have a chapter on urban planning. So when we come up with the second edition, we're going to definitely fill that hole. But does anybody here know of any other popular urban planning exercises that have been successful? Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So just to recap the 2 questions, the first was about mutual aid, and this next one was about urban planning. I'll just point out in the chat, Bruce said OPA Hickson Dupuis, and okay, you're recognized. He's writing it down. Okay, beautiful. But any of the speakers can jump in here.
Yeah, I'll answer the last question. Mutual aid, I'll leave to someone else. But as Bruce was saying, yeah, they're in Verdun. They're working currently on a plan where it's been out in a few, not so long ago. I know they were working on it. I haven't seen it though. St. Henry has also worked on a plan for west of St. Henry. Tout ce qui est autour de la Canada Malting, entre autres. So reinventing that public space for public needs, which is really an interesting plan that they've brought forward. The issue there is trying to get the municipality on board and financing that project. which is not so easily done when it's not on municipal land, as are other plans. We see that they're doing a lot of work currently on the Hippodrome site because it's municipal, and on Louvain-Est as well, which is municipal. But all the other lands, which is not the current city's property, it's a bit harder for them to be imaginative on how to create different responses to private development. They're using what they call the droit de préemption a lot, which is like a tactical tool made to enter a negotiation with these private owners, private developers, and saying, well, if we don't want to purchase that land, but we have the lawful to do that. We're not going to do it because we don't have the money to do it all across Montreal. But if you would like to hear our concerns, it would be interested. So we would like the city of Montreal to do a bit more of negotiation and a bit more of drastic action with that tool, because it was created in that sense, and now they're not using it at its full potential, I believe.
Who's going to answer the other question? I'm afraid to.
On mutual aid.
I could. The thing about all these initiatives that happen during crises, it's a question of whether they continue and how they begin to coalesce with other groups and movements. And I think the problem we faced in the community movement and community organizations and in Quebec and in the city is this huge fragmentation that happens. And the idea behind Prenons la Ville is to break silos and to bring groups together to focus on City Hall, which hasn't happened in a long, long time. And so groups tend they do good things at local level, and they really take initiatives and they involve lots of people, but they also tend then to be isolated from the wider struggles and don't build this kind of coalitions, and they don't build permanent organization that helps develop in the long term. I mean, that was a lesson. I mean, I've been working with the Immigrant Workers Center for 20 years, and I'm convinced that if you don't have some degree of formal organization, it doesn't mean anti-democratic or bureaucratic, but an organized presence that can continue despite who's there, then all these great initiatives disappear. So that would be my reaction to what you said, and hopefully you can join us with Prenons la Ville.
I would definitely echo Eric's sentiment, and I think it's worth pointing out one of the successes that I've seen in the city is the mutual aid organizing that's been going on in Milton Park. They've done a very good job of organizing through the existing institutions there, the citizen assemblies there, and have really expanded their reach and their impact. And I know there are other people who are much more capable of speaking about the nature of that work. So if anyone wants to contribute their experiences in Milton Park, that would be useful, because I've been very pleased to see how well things have gone there during the pandemic. The next question is going to come from my comrade, Claudia Leduc. Go ahead.
Bonjour, merci pour ce bel événement. Bravo. J'ai hâte de lire ce livre. J'avais une observation ou une question concernant la manière dont la ville s'octroie des nouveaux droits, comme le droit de préemption, justement. Je me souviens qu'il y a des années, il y a seulement 2-3 ans, notre building où je vis, ou que vous voyez en ce moment d'ailleurs, avait été mise en vente, et il y avait eu l'IRIS, l'Institut de recherche en sciences sociales, si je me souviens bien du nom, avait fait une recherche et avait paru un certain nombre de recommandations pour lutter contre la gentrification. Et il y avait là-dedans une mention du droit de préemption. Et on avait eu, nos rencontres en tant que locataires soucieux de ce qui allait arriver de notre building, on avait une rencontre à la ville, on voulait faire une coop et on leur avait dit, il y a un droit de préemption. Comme c'est long pour nous de se constituer un dossier et de recevoir des subventions et tout ça pour réussir à faire une coop, est-ce que vous ne pourriez pas nous aider avec le droit de préemption? Et il nous avait dit, oh non, bon, quelque chose comme, je me souviens plus exactement et je ne peux pas te dire qui m'avait dit ça, mais on m'avait dit, non, c'est quelque chose de pas très réaliste qui a été écrit par l'IRIS, ça ne marche pas cette affaire-là, on ne peut pas le faire. Et depuis peu de temps, on voit qu'ils ont trouvé comment le faire finalement et ils commencent à l'utiliser, ce droit-là. Donc, on se rend compte que ben, nos dirigeants savent pas trop, connaissent pas trop les règles, savent pas trop comment les appliquer et on voit l'utilité d'organisations comme l'IRIS qui font des recherches, qui prennent des spécialistes, qui sortent des expertises disant oui, il y a cette loi-là, tu te rends pas compte qu'il y a cette application-là que vous pourriez utiliser. Donc, je pense que si on peut travailler avec des organismes comme ça pour continuer à creuser et à chercher des solutions qui peuvent contrer tous les problèmes auxquels on fait face, notamment la spéculation immobilière galopante, on peut voir que c'est très encourageant. Ils finissent par tiens, peut-être qu'ils écoutent et ils peuvent appliquer aussi. Donc, je ne sais pas s'il y a des gens qui savent comment c'est arrivé comme ça, s'ils savent que, voilà, comment ça se fait que ce droit-là a commencé à être connu par la ville, est-ce que c'est lié à l'étude de l'IRIS ou pas, ou voilà, le maillage, il peut être intéressant à faire. Voilà ce que j'avais à observer. Et je ne sais pas s'il y a des gens qui ont des informations à ce sujet-là.
Merci beaucoup, Claudia. On a une autre question. James W., do you still have a question? Your hand was up and now I don't see it.
Well, unfortunately, my French isn't good enough to have understood the preceding comments, and maybe do any of you want to respond to that before I go ahead with something that's a little, it's about some things that are happening here in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
I think we're
happy. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, we're happy to package questions. So go ahead.
I want to go back to when I tuned in. I was listening to Mostafa, and I really liked what he said about the kind of a cat chasing its tail, where the municipality is relying on revenue from development, and that how that is contradictory to affordability. So try to keep me on track as far as time is concerned. In Cambridge is a rapidly growing city, up to 120,000 people now. Biotech development, commercial real estate development tied to an enormous growth in biotech has been central to the development strategies of the city administration. Moderna are headquartered here, if you didn't know. They're actually building I met a guy 2 nights ago who's working on a new building for them in Cambridge. So there's massive commercial real estate development centered in biotech and IT. The government is a city manager form of government. The city manager is not, so we don't have an elected mayor with power. We have a city manager, and my interpretation is that basically the city is an enormous real estate asset managed by a real estate management company calling itself the government, deriving revenue for itself and its enterprises, some of which, of course, are sort of distributed around to various constituencies and keeping people on board. But most essentially, the homeowners, who are only 35% of the city are homeowners, 65% are renters. And the homeowners benefit from this strategy of selling off the city to the real estate developers and biotech, because it keeps the property taxes low. Cambridge have the lowest property tax rate, the 6th lowest, actually, the last I checked, the sixth lowest property tax rate of in Massachusetts, 351 municipalities. So if you're a homeowner, you're making out like a bandit. You know, if you were able to get in on this racket some time ago, it now nobody can get in. So people are trying to find or searching for ways to react to this, respond. And I put in the chat, just this coming tomorrow, some people have organized a rally at City Hall to bring attention to the unaffordability, which is what people are constantly complaining about in Cambridge. But the contradictions are interesting in that the pro-development politicians are claiming they're for affordable housing, because what the affordable housing projects that are being done are sort of being paid for out of, are being paid for out of this development. The urban growth machine is what it's sometimes been called, or the urban growth coalition. And that's the politics people are struggling to find answers to, and it's not easy. And because I've gotten, thank you for the warning, it's very interesting to hear from all of you about what you're doing in Montreal. And there are many people. Peter Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse's son, worked on these issues for many years, wrote a wonderful, there's great material from Peter and others about urban planning in particular, because I know someone asked about that. So thanks.
Thank you so much, James, for that in a lot of ways parallel situation which you've brought up. So I leave it to the speakers and the editors if you want to respond in some fashion to James and Claudia.
I can respond to Claudia's. Le droit de préemption, c'est un outil législatif qui a été inséré dans les dispositions municipales il y a 4 ans. Lorsque le gouvernement libéral de Philippe Couillard avait adopté 2 projets de loi, un sur les municipalités et gouvernements de proximité, projet de loi 121, et l'autre c'était sur Montréal, métropole du Québec, le projet de loi 122. Je ne me rappelle plus dans lequel il avait inséré, mais c'était un nouveau outil législatif qui avait intégré là-dedans pour les municipalités, pour la Ville de Montréal, pour qu'elle puisse utiliser à défaut de pouvoir utiliser son droit d'expropriation, qui est un outil qui était jugé un petit peu trop complexe à utiliser, qui avait beaucoup de contestations judiciaires lorsque la Ville l'utilisait par le passé, et donc qui menait à un peu que les municipalités n'utilisaient plus, cet outil-là, vraisemblablement. Donc, ils ont essayé d'en insérer un nouveau, qui est le droit de préemption, qui fait en sorte que si la Ville cible un terrain puis met ce droit-là à enchasser dans le registre foncier, au moins le propriétaire est avisé à l'avance que la Ville va pouvoir avoir la possibilité d'acheter ce terrain-là à un prix qui est équivalent à la valeur marchande qui est entendue entre ce propriétaire privé-là et la personne qui souhaite l'acheter. Donc, la Ville arrive en quelque sorte comme dans une transaction qui est déjà établie, et elle dit, bon, ben moi, j'égalise cette transaction-là et j'ai priorité pour acheter ce terrain. Malheureusement, c'est que la Ville a l'obligation de mettre la même valeur équivalente que la valeur entendue entre le propriétaire et le marchand, ce qui fait qu'il y a beaucoup de valeur spéculative qui est ajoutée à cette transaction-là sur la valeur transformative de l'immeuble, par exemple un espace industriel qui veut être dézoné, transformé en gros complexe résidentiel, a une valeur beaucoup plus grande que sa valeur foncière actuelle qui est inscrite dans le rôle d'évaluation foncière, mais la Ville ne peut pas négocier sur la valeur marchande qui est l'objet de la transaction. Elle doit légaliser plutôt, et elle doit l'acheter à ce prix-là. Donc, ce qui fait que c'est un outil plus intéressant que le droit d'expropriation peut-être, mais qui reste encore très difficile à l'utiliser, à mettre en place. Nous, puis je me rappelle très bien l'étude, c'était Louis Gaudreau et Manuel Johnson, Manuel Johnson qui a travaillé au service juridique communautaire de Pointe St pendant de nombreuses années. On avait travaillé là-dessus, sur ces questions-là, pour essayer de voir c'est quoi les outils législatifs à Pointe St. On avait une réflexion de comité là-dessus pour voir comment la Ville pourrait utiliser ses propres pouvoirs pour favoriser une meilleure protection du parc de logement locatif privé, parce que c'est lui qu'on voyait comme étant le plus, qui était le plus attaqué, qui avait fait l'objet de beaucoup de conversions, beaucoup de démolitions, beaucoup de transformations, d'expulsions, de rénovations majeures. Maintenant, on parle de rénoviction. Donc, il y a toutes sortes de stratégies qui sont utilisées par les différents propriétaires ou de promoteurs pour sortir des ménages qui sont plus vulnérables, plus isolés, plus marginalisés, et de rehausser la valeur foncière de ce terrain-là à une valeur qui est jugée appropriée dans cette logique spéculative-là qui prévoit à Montréal. Donc, bref, ça fait un petit tour d'horizon sur le droit de préemption, mais on est loin de la solution gagnante. Mais c'est un outil de plus à la disposition de la ville.
Do any of the other presenters want to jump in?
I mean, I guess Eric. I mean, I was just gonna jump in quickly about about James's comment. I mean, the interesting thing about the cat, the chasing the tail kind of scenario is that where does cities actually, if you look at the city of Montreal, where does it spend its money on, right? I mean, the solution is also within that, right? And it goes to some of the things talked about in the book, right? I mean, one of the largest portions of cities' budgets, Montreal no exception, is policing, right? It's a major part of the municipal budget. It's 17-18%, right? It's the only thing that comes into comparison to that is the city of Montreal's debt itself, right? So who are we in debt to? Why are we in debt? These are also factors that are political, right? They're not just technocratic. They're not just, so in terms of the question of I mean, the cat chasing the tail is even more, insidious in a way, because through development to create all of this revenue to pay for a system of policing that is not necessary and being called by community groups, by Black communities, by marginalized communities, that it's not necessary. And this amount of spending and funding of police. So we have this entire sort of system of relying on development and relying on revenues to essentially to subsidize an institution of systemic racism, or to pay off debts, because so much responsibility has been downloaded to municipalities, right? So there is ways that all those things are linked. But I was just going to make that one comment that I realized in my head while you were speaking. But I think Eric was going to respond.
Just quickly, the question of using the tools that are available to the city, what's striking in the book is the neighborhoods that have a tradition and are highly organized and are willing to make demands have made some gains around these things. Most recently, Park Extension. The neighborhoods where there isn't much, in contrast, the Chabanel area and the quiet redevelopment of Chabanel that Mostafa and Norma Rantizi describe in their chapter, the absence of that just opens up the city for capital just to shape whichever way they want. So I think the lesson from our book is the importance of local organizing, of building an analysis at a local level, making demands and pushing, not that anyone's guaranteeing anyone's going to win all the time or anything like that. But if there's no resistance, then for sure the other side's going to win. And that's the major lesson that we took away from the book.
Great.
Yeah, it appears again and again that when citizens organize and fight, then they make some progress. They win some things. Yeah.
So we were hoping to conclude this event by 5:30. So there's about 8 more minutes. I know Jason Prince has to go have dinner with his kids. It's his favorite excuse. So I wanted to ask a question that I've been holding on to, that some of the speakers touched on to a certain extent, but I was hoping just for some further connections to be made. So immediately, what comes to mind for me in the context of housing and transit, which have been discussed a fair amount, is that there are specific impending crises associated with the end of the pandemic, whatever that means. But insofar as the pandemic is starting to slowly come to a conclusion, I think we can anticipate that people will begin to suffer the effects of eviction, of raised rents, etc., in the context of housing. And then in the context of public transit, I think a lot of people are going to soon discover that they're going to find public transit in Montreal, which offers fewer services and which has become more expensive. And so I wanted to ask how citizen groups in their neighborhoods ought to approach these two particular issues, and also specifically for Patrick, can you expand, and Mostafa touched on this to a degree as well, so you can jump in too, but can you expand on how these issues more specifically and concretely are associated with the ecological crisis that we face? Because I don't think that's intuitive for some people, making that jump between housing and transit and something like the environmental crisis.
Well, I'll just jump in very quickly. It was actually thinking about this book that made me feel that if we had, this would be the ideal. If we had a tremendous commitment to social housing, that would change so many things about our city. For one thing, the core wouldn't be hollowed out. And also, it would change the pattern of land use. Now, maybe this is utopian, but I think that the way we're developing this city and other cities is absolutely fatal. So the question is, what are the things that can really contribute to change? In my opinion, housing, really good public housing project, which would be outside of the conventional market, that would do wonders for this city, in my opinion. And it would change the means and methods of planning. When something like the REM is concocted to basically as a real estate project for the worst kind of real estate, that shows you what happens under the present logic. So we need a counter logic. And I personally believe that low-cost public housing is what we really badly need in the city. And I think it would have very great effects in terms of our assumptions about the way things are done. So I'm taking up too much time, but let's say what happened at Cabot Square should never have been allowed to happen. That's down near the old Forum, okay? Atwater area. What happened there was really something else. And the city found its hands tied, but it shouldn't have. It should have actually, in my opinion, taken away the operators' permits. They would have faced a huge lawsuit, but the operator would have been on difficult ground, I believe, morally and politically. Anyway, that didn't happen. It was too much to ask, apparently. But that's the sort of thing that governments have to do. So it's a belief that I have that social housing would be a major change in the way we do things, because major change is what is required. We're really going down a very bad road right now. Doesn't help much, that answer.
Perhaps I can say a thing about public transit here. I wrote a rather idealistic chapter in the book. If we look at the amount of money that we spend in the Montreal region on car-oriented infrastructure, it's in the tens of billions. And over the next few years, with the bridges and tunnels that need to be repaired, we're talking about 125 or 150 billion. So what we need to do, in fact, is, and right now we have a modal share, that is the number of people who get to work at rush hour at about 25% in public transit, and most of the rest are in cars. And what we need to do is we need to flip those two numbers. Now, what are the what's the politics of that flip? I don't know, but we need to do that urgently if we're going to seriously face our climate budget. So the money is there, it's just spent on the wrong things. It's the same argument that was made earlier about the police. The money is in our budgets, it's just that it's prioritized wrong. And what we need to do is make a definitive stand on the car and say we're not moving people in the city by car anymore, we're doing it by public transit. And here's the new model. And we take space away from the automobile. So all these roads that cut across the metropolitan, the 20, the 40, the 25, all the roads, the big roads that cut the city like a loaf of bread. All of those become the structure of the mass transit network. And we approach it as a grid, and we move people easily in the grid. And there are transfer points. And around, this crazy idea is that around each of those little butterfly on-ramps and off-ramps that are on the city and off the city at the intersection of highways, those become parking lots. And we park the cars there, people get up and they get into a public transport grid going in all directions. That's the kind of vision we need. And then we need the money to follow. And we need $100 billion to fix this city over the next 10 years, and $100 billion in all the cities across Canada. We need that kind of a big transition, and we need to do it now. And I'll shut up now. We have 1 minute left.
Thank you, Jason. There are some other questions that I think are really important that have been said in chat, and I feel bad for not getting some of them. That was a mistake on my part in terms of my moderation abilities, but I do want to make sure that we conclude at about the appropriate time. I told our speakers 5:30 would be the latest we go. So out of respect for them, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up here and make a few concluding remarks. First of all, thank you to the speakers and to everyone who came. This is exactly the kind of event we were hoping to have, something intimate with a good discussion, where we really dig into some issues and get the ball moving on really talking about some of this stuff. If you want to continue to speak with us, two things. One, we're going to go ahead and have a more official book launch, hopefully in a public space outdoors sometime this summer. We're talking about it, Black Rose and the editors. We're trying to figure something out. If you're here, it's probably because you're on one of our mailing lists. We are sort of specific about who we asked to attend to this. So expect another invitation to a bigger book launch, potentially with some kind of in-person component, hopefully a hybrid event. We're working on it. You'll hear more about that soon. Another great group that you could join is Prenons la Ville, who's doing a lot of the work that this book talks about. The editors are a part of it, as are many of the contributors, and we're really trying to push forward a lot of these ideas on the ground in our neighborhoods. So please consider joining Prenons la Ville. Claudia linked the website earlier, so you could check that out. And I have to again remind you that part of the reason we're here is this book. So please consider pre-ordering the book. It's a great way to help with its promotion and marketing. The more pre-orders we get for the book through our website, blackrosebooks.com, the more we're able to have marketing opportunities elsewhere to really share these ideas in Montreal and beyond. We're already getting approached by some newspapers and magazines and radio shows who want to talk about it. And that's the kind of energy we're trying to push forward. So pre-order the book, tell your friends about it, and definitely stay tuned for more that's going to happen on this front. Again, thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to just quickly say to the editors, do they want to add anything that I missed? No? Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the event. Oh, Cédric, go ahead. Oh, he's clapping.
They were clapping hands. They were clapping hands.
Okay, well, great. At that, I'm going to go ahead and end the YouTube stream and end this Zoom. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
À la prochaine.
À la prochaine.
Sorry you had to live in Haverhill, Jason.
He's revealing my hometown. I'm secretly American. If anybody has any like end questions that they wanted to ask me specifically, you can go ahead. I ended the YouTube stream and a couple people are messaging me.